It's a very warm welcome to this prize lecture in Life and Medical Sciences. My name is Geraint Rees. I'm the Vice Provost for Research, Innovation and Global Engagement here, and I'm going to say a few words of welcome and introduction. It's the 2024 UCL Prize Lecture in Life and Medical Sciences, and I want to welcome and thank particularly Sanjeev and Sanjita Kanoria for their support for this lecture. They fund the lecture and surrounding activity via their company, Advinia Healthcare, and they're seated in the audience, and we're really grateful to them for their continued support for this lecture. Now, it's a lecture prize that's awarded annually by UCL and has, we think, become one of the preeminent series on contemporary science in Europe. The annual lecture for us provides an opportunity to celebrate, to debate, and to talk about important scientific advances. And it recognizes those people, both amongst our community and more broadly throughout the world, who've had a real demonstrable impact on our understanding of the life and medical sciences. And so it gives me particular pleasure that Demis Hassabis is this year's recipient of the prize. I'm thrilled, as I'm sure many of you are, to welcome him back to UCL. He's never really gone away, and DeepMind are, of course, just up the road. And I've known him now for, I think, almost 15 years. Formally, as you know, he is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Google DeepMind, one of the world's leading AI research groups. It was founded in 2010. I think I got my first glimpse of it a few months later, in Russell Square in very tiny surroundings, but I remember the chessboard being a prominent feature of the tiny premises it was then. And of course, now it's grown. It was at the forefront of the field then when it was in stealth mode, and it's at the forefront of the field now, producing landmark breakthroughs that I'm sure we'll hear about and many of you know about, like AlphaGo, the first person to beat the world Go champion at the complex game of Go, which I completely failed to get my children to play when they were younger. So that's a parental failing, but I'm sure many of you play Go, and it's a fantastic game. AlphaFold as well. Protein folding, key to many of us in the room and what we do in the life sciences, a solution to the 50-year-old grand challenge of protein folding. Now, Demis himself has played chess from a very young age and is really very good at chess, and I know some of his chess partners are in the audience today, which is fantastic. When he was younger, he coded the classic AI simulation game Theme Park when he was 17. Then went to Cambridge University, graduated in computer science with a double first, and founded Elixir Studios, a pioneering video games company. And then there's an interesting twist in 2009 when Demis left that and completed a PhD in cognitive neuroscience at UCL, with Eleanor Maguire, who's sitting here as his supervisor, and myself playing a very subsidiary role as his second supervisor. Demis spent his time deeply immersed in understanding cognitive architectures, how the hippocampus operated and coded space and memory. And that, in some respects, is what I think is the key to understanding why Demis is such an important individual in the world. Many, many great people are out there creating some of the new AI algorithms of the future. But Demis also has a deep understanding of the human brain and of cognitive processes in the human brain. And I think that's key to some of the advances he's going to tell us about tonight. UCL was also, of course, where he met co-founder Shane Legg and later Mustafa Seliman and founded the company. So we are incredibly proud to have played a small part in Demis's amazing journey. His work now has been cited over 100,000 times, as you probably know, featured in Science's top 10 breakthroughs of the year on 5 separate occasions, which is quite good going. He's a fellow of the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering, featured in the Time 100 list of most influential people, and of course in 2018 was awarded a CBE. We are incredibly proud to welcome Demis to the stage. He's going to deliver a lecture titled Using AI to Accelerate Scientific Discovery, and I'd like you now to welcome him to the stage, please.
Thanks, Geraint, for that wonderful introduction, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be back here at UCL giving this prize lecture. It was especially wonderful, actually, in the drinks reception just earlier, to meet all of the DeepMind scholars at UCL that we sponsored over 300 now over the last few years, and seeing how well they're doing and how they're flourishing in their careers now. So it's been fantastic so far, the day today. So I'm going to talk about, there's quite a lot of things to cover in this lecture. I'm going to sort of give an overview of how we've got to this moment in AI. Obviously, it's kind of the buzzword of the moment. But people like myself have been working towards this moment for over 20 years now. So I want to kind of give you a view of how it's been like at the coalface, starting from back in 2010 with the founding of DeepMind for us, and then now using AI to accelerate scientific discovery, which has always been my passion, and the reason that I've worked my whole life on AI is I always believed it would be an amazing tool to help us as scientists and experts in different domains to accelerate the research, the important research that they're doing. So I think we've come to an incredible watershed moment now. And then also I'll talk a little bit about, of course, large models and language models and what's happening at the frontier there as well. So when we started DeepMind back in 2010, it's quite hard to imagine now, but just 13 years ago, but almost nobody was talking about AI. It was very much a niche sort of subject, even in the computer science departments. But back then, especially Shane Legg and I, both as postdocs at Gatsby, were thinking that if we could pull together what we sort of knew about the brain and the brain architecture and some algorithms about the brain, combined with advances in compute, so things like GPUs that I'd actually used earlier on in my games career to do computer graphics, but turns out everything's a matrix multiplication. So it's also useful for AI and neural networks. And so we could see that was progressing. And then sort of various theoretical ideas around what intelligence might be and how to measure it. So we wanted to kind of bring together all of those different strands, the ideas from neuroscience, computer science, and hardware and engineering, and kind of put that together into a sort of an Apollo program, ambitious Apollo program effort. And we felt that if we were to do this, we could make some very fast progress. And the time was right, the ingredients were there. And it turned out to be the case. But back in 2010, that seemed to be quite fanciful. And what we have always called the work we're doing is we've called it artificial general intelligence, and to stress this idea of generality. So systems that are able to learn for themselves and are general, so they can do many tasks out of the box, as opposed to the more sort of narrow type of AI that people used to work on back in the early 2000s and late 90s. So our mission today, the way we articulate it, sort of not really changed over the decade plus we've been working on this, but we sort of talk about building AGI or AI responsibly to benefit all of humanity. That is at the core of the mission of DeepMind and now our combined mission at Google DeepMind. So as I was saying, back in 2010, really there were two dominant approaches to trying to build AI systems. And I'd actually say the dominant view was actually the left-hand side here, expert systems. So these are famously systems like Deep Blue that beat Garry Kasparov at chess. And they're basically hard-coded expert systems. So really, it's the programmers that solve the problem and code that solution as a series of heuristics or rules, and then the systems, these expert systems sort of execute that set of rules. So they're sort of very much inspired by logic systems and logic theory ideas. But the problem is they're very brittle, and they can't deal with unexpected things, and they're obviously limited to what you as the designers already know how to solve. By contrast, learning systems, which is obviously what we bet on at DeepMind and has now become the dominant paradigm, learns solutions directly from first principles, directly from data or from experience. And that means it can potentially generalize to new tasks that it's never seen before. And I think incredibly promisingly, it can also mean that it could solve potentially problems and tasks that we don't ourselves know yet how to solve as scientists and experts. So that's kind of the promise, I guess, of these types of systems. And they're very much, especially in the early days, inspired by and validated by neuroscience ideas, as Geraint mentioned. So that was an incredibly key part of my learning and my career, was doing my PhD with Eleanor and Geraint and others here at UCL, and then my postdocs at MIT, trying to understand how the brain solves some of these cognitive tasks and cognitive capabilities like memory and planning and imagination. And still some of those capabilities we still don't have yet in our AI systems, but we're trying to build towards. So the left-hand side, the expert systems was very much the dominant paradigm in the 2000s and 90s, and then learning systems, we were trying to prove out that the potential that they had, and we always felt at DeepMind that that would be the way to eventually crack AGI. And our first big breakthrough is really using games. So we used games as a convenient testing ground for all of our algorithmic ideas. Partly also because of my background in games. I love games. I've tried to use them in every form possible. So training my own mind with chess and board games, and then eventually, ironically, training our AI systems on these games. And we started with the simplest kind of popular game system, which is the Atari system from the 1970s. And some of you might recognize, these classic games like Space Invaders. And the idea, which was very challenging at the time, this was back in 2012, 2013, was could we build a system that could learn how to play these kinds of challenging games just from the raw pixels on the screen? So only being given the pixel stream as an input and being told to maximize the score. And that's it. Not told what the controls were, how to get those points, how to make sure they don't lose lives, and so on. It just had to do it directly from first principles from the pixels on the screen. And we managed to do this. It took about 18 months of really hard, innovative work. And then we eventually built the system Atari DQN, which was able to beat the highest scores humans could get on these games, not just on one game like Space Invaders, but all the many hundreds of different games that were available in the Atari system. And that was for the first time we realized that we were onto something, and that maybe we got the timing right, that these learning systems were actually able to do something that was challenging. These games are obviously built to be interesting and challenging to human players, and our DQN system out of the box was able to play any of these games. We then took that to probably the zenith of our games AI work with AlphaGo, as Geraint mentioned earlier. And that was our system to take these ideas of learning and actually self-learning, so learning by playing against itself, different versions of itself, to master the game of Go. And Go, for those of you who don't know, it's what they play sort of in Asia and China, Japan and Korea. It kind of occupies the intellectual echelon that chess does in the West. But it's actually a more complex game. You can see a Go board here on the right. It's got many more possibilities, and it's a more esoteric game. It's a very beautiful game, and it's all about patterns, and rather than brute force calculations like chess. And because of that, it was much harder in fact impossible, for these expert system approaches, even though they'd cracked chess in the 90s, to scale to something like Go. They just were never able to play Go better than an average amateur, let alone a professional or world champion level. And just one quick way of illustrating the complexity of Go, there are over 10 to the power 170 possible positions in Go, which is far more than there are atoms in the universe. So there's sort of no way that you could brute force a solution to the problem of Go. And furthermore, because it's such an aesthetic game, even the top players in the world, when you ask them, why did they make a certain move, they will tell you it felt right. They'll use words like that. Rather than, if you ask a chess player why they made a certain move, they'll usually give you a series of, lines or calculations and logical reasons why they were playing that move. So even the top human players sort of rely on their intuition. So we managed to build AlphaGo, and very famously, we challenged a legendary player, the South Korean Grandmaster Lee Sedol, who is considered to be one of the greatest players of all time. And we challenged him at $1 million challenge match in Seoul, and it was a huge deal. The whole country pretty much came to a standstill because he's a sort of national hero He was described to me as the David Beckham of Korea, so for what that's worth. And 200 million people watched the match live, so it's a huge event, especially in Asia. If you're interested in the human aspect of that, I can recommend this award-winning documentary that was directed about the AlphaGo match, and it's on YouTube for those of you interested. But AlphaGo won the match 4-1, which is obviously incredible. And for the first time, a program had beaten the world champion at Go. But actually, more importantly than AlphaGo winning the match was how it won. And this was best illustrated by what's now become a very famous move called Move 37 in game 2 of this 5-game match. And this is the board at Move 37, which is quite early on in a game of Go. And AlphaGo is playing the black pieces and has just placed this stone on the right-hand side here for Move 37. And when that stone was placed, the professional commentators, who were commentating live on the match, they literally, fell off their chairs. Because if you're a top Go player, you would know, you would never make this move. Basically, it's on the 5th line, this red line I've drawn here, and that's too near the center for playing a move like that this early on in the game. So it's sort of unthinkable if you were a top Go player. So this would be, trained out of you at Go school. You would never, your wrist would be slapped on this if you played that move. But interestingly, this move, it was so shocking that one of the commentators said that it must have been a misclick by our operator, Ajia Huang, that he must have put the stone in the wrong place. But later on, 100 moves later, it turns out that the fighting in the bottom left-hand corner here that you can see, all these stones in the left-hand side, they spilled out into the middle of the board and then eventually touched this Move 37 stone. And that stone was exactly in the right place to decide that battle and then the whole match. So as if AlphaGo had placed it there presciently for 100 moves later for it to be in the perfect position to decide the whole match. So it's this sort of element of, I would call it creativity, that AlphaGo displayed. And actually, these games that AlphaGo played are now being studied by all the Go professionals around the world, and it's actually changed the game of Go and made the best human Go players more creative as well, because they're trying things that traditionally they were told, there's no reason, there's no way you should play that move, but they're questioning some of those received wisdom. So just a quick side note about creativity. Of course, creativity, it's not a well agreed on definition, but if we use the kind of operational definition of coming up with something new that has never been seen before, that's also useful for whatever purpose you're trying to create for, then I think AlphaGo has displayed some creativity. But I would sort of couch it as 3 levels of creativity, 2 of which I think our current AI systems have, and 1 we have yet to show. So I think if you think of interpolation as the lowest level of creativity, so what you could imagine there is if you show an AI system, a million pictures of cats, and then you say, come up with a new picture of a prototypical cat. You could imagine an AI system doing that, and they indeed do that, and it comes up with a sort of averaging of all of the cats that it's seen. And that's, that prototypical cat doesn't exist in the training set, so in some sense it is new, but it's a very sort of basic level, I would say, of new idea. More interesting is extrapolation, which I think is what AlphaGo has done, where it has this set of experiences. It's looked at all the Go games that humans have played online, but then it extrapolates that to new ideas, new motifs out of the distribution that it was trained in. So here, for example, playing moves like Move 37 that no human player would have ever played. So that's very exciting because it means, that it can come up with new ideas and extend our knowledge as a society or as experts in a particular domain. But then the final level of creativity, the highest level of creativity, I would call invention or, true invention or out-of-the-box thinking. And there, we don't know how to do that yet. So that is, if you couch it in the terms of games, is instead of just coming up with Move 37, can you invent Go? Instead of coming up with new chess moves, can you invent a game as good as chess? And so far, our systems are not, of course, not able to do that. But I have some theories as to why, and I think there are ways that we can get towards that level of creativity. So how does AlphaGo and systems like that we built on top of this AlphaZero, which we generalized to any two-player game? So it was always my dream, one of my dreams was always to build a system that could play any two-player perfect information game to a world championship level, just straight out of the box without any specific domain training. And we finally achieved that back in sort of 2017, building on top of AlphaGo and generalizing, taking out anything that was Go specific about AlphaGo and then making it fully general. And this is basically how those systems work. So you start off with a version 1 neural network of your system, AlphaZero, and to begin with, it plays totally randomly. And you play 100,000 games against itself. So you imagine that builds up a database now of games that it's played. And what you do is you try it, that generates a whole data set, and you try and train a version 2 of the neural network that will predict what move the earlier system would play in a particular position, and also who is likely to win the game from that mid-game position and by what probability, chance of winning. So it's trying to predict two things, the most likely moves to be played and the probability of winning. And those are the two heuristics that are critical for the system to play well at the game. So you train a second version, and then you have a little mini tournament between version 2 and version 1, 100-game match-off. And if version 2 beats version 1 by a certain threshold, statistically significant threshold of, say, 55% is the win rate we set, then you replace the generating system with that new V2. And then you go around the cycle again, and you generate a new set of data based on V2. So this data set is slightly higher quality, because V2 is slightly better system than V1. And you train a V3, and you have a match against the old V2, and you continue this cycle. Obviously, if the new version doesn't beat the old version, what you do is you generate another 100,000 games with the old version. So now you have 200,000 games, so a bigger data set to train the new version 3 on. And eventually, the new version will beat the older version. And what's amazing about this is it turns out after 17 cycles of this, you go from, say, in chess, playing completely randomly to better than any chess entity there's ever been on the planet. And it takes less than 24 hours, it takes 8 hours. So me as a chess player, it's kind of amazing watching this in real time. You know, you have your breakfast, you start this process off, it's playing randomly. By about lunchtime, you can still beat it. And then in the afternoon, it's stronger than the world champion. So it's kind of amazing to see in real time. And I did watch it, one of the training sessions literally in real time for the 8 hours to get a real feel for how these systems improve. So what's it doing then? And what is AlphaGo and AlphaZero and these systems, what are they doing? Well, if you think about a Go tree of possibilities, right? So I mentioned to you 10 to the power 170, these enormous numbers of possibilities. So imagine that this is a game tree, and each node in the tree is a particular Go position. So we're currently in this position at the top of the tree, so represented by that little mini board. And you've got to find the right plan, the right move to make that will get you best towards a winning position. In amongst this forest of possibilities, obviously totally intractable to look at all of the gray possibilities in gray. And what we're doing is we're using this model that the AlphaGo neural network has built up of Go, and like what are kind of reasonable Go moves to make, and who's likely to be winning in certain positions if one were to make those moves. And that model guides the tree search so that it makes it tractable. So instead of having to look at all of the possibilities in gray, it just needs to look at a tiny fraction of all the possibilities, maybe these branches represented here in blue. And then when it runs out of thinking time and it has to make a move, it then obviously picks the best line that it's found so far from the ones in blue, and here this represented by the lines in pink. And that's the move that it then outputs. Just as a quick aside on chess, which is obviously still very close to my heart, and I still play online every day pretty much, just to keep the brain in good nick. And this AlphaZero is one of the cool things it did is it came up with a kind of new style of chess, where instead of most chess computers sort of like material. So because they've been programmed with heuristics telling them to add up the score of the pieces on their side versus the piece on the other side. And obviously whoever has more material is usually winning the game. But actually, AlphaZero doesn't have any preconception about that because we've not programmed in any of these heuristics from chess grandmasters. We've let it learn for itself what are the right heuristics. And so that means it can be much more dynamic. It can decide in the moment whether certain pieces are worth certain amounts. So what it means is that AlphaZero ends up playing this much more dynamic, fluid type of style where it's happy to sacrifice pieces for mobility. So it prefers mobility over materiality. And that's actually, to the human eye and for human chess players, that's an extremely beautiful style. So I'm really pleased that's what it ended up doing, because it's actually a very aesthetically pleasing style for a computer to play in. And it came up with brilliant things like this kind of position where the other Stockfish, which is the best expert system, chess system, was kind of stuck completely in the corner in what's called zugzwang. So it had no useful moves, even though it has all these powerful pieces like the queens and the rooks still. And Garry Kasparov and Magnus Carlsen commented on these, two former world chess champions, about how they felt. Gary was sort of saying that AlphaZero really represents the truth of chess because it doesn't have any of the prejudices of human programmers and their priorities. And actually, Magnus is a fantastic, probably the world's greatest ever chess player, used AlphaZero and a book we wrote about AlphaZero style to also improve and change his gaming style, chess style too. So we had all these big breakthroughs, and we've been lucky enough to sort of use games to kind of leverage games to help us make these algorithmic breakthroughs. But really, this was all just, these were all just a means to an end. These weren't ends in themselves. These are very fun. I love games. I could work on games my whole life. But they were just convenient training grounds for creating these general purpose algorithms that we could then apply to big real world problems, of course, especially in science. So what do we look for a problem? And it's very exciting now, actually, a few years ago when we finished off AlphaZero and AlphaStar, our program to play the complex game of StarCraft, which is the most complex computer game, strategy game. We felt we were ready to use these ideas and algorithms to tackle some important scientific questions. So what do we look for in a problem? Well, there's 3 criteria that I generally look for that would make it suitable for the types of methods that we're good at. So one is we love big, massive combinatorial search spaces. So if you could couch the problem in terms of a huge search space that you're trying to traverse, that's usually a good sign for our methods being applicable. We need to normally be able to specify a clear objective function or some sort of metric to optimize against. So obviously in games, this is quite simple. It's maximizing a score or winning the game. But actually a lot of scientific problems, turns out if you think through it carefully, you can also come up with quite clear objective functions. Things like minimizing the energy in a system and so on. And then third, obviously you need a lot of data or experience for these learning systems to be able to model the environment that they're in. And ideally, you'd also have not just some data, but you'd also have an accurate and efficient simulator to generate new synthetic data to complement your existing real data. So throughout my career, I've kind of collected a list of problems over 30 years where I felt that they were extremely meaningful chat-grand challenges, but I also felt that learning systems, general purpose learning systems, would be very well suited to potentially eventually solving or cracking these problems. And at the top of my list has been for over 20 years now is the protein folding problem. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just quickly describe what it is. So proteins are essential to all life. Pretty much every function in the body depends on proteins. And what the protein does in the body, in nature, is partially dependent on its 3D structure. So the 3D structure of these proteins is very important to know. And the protein folding problem is that can you actually predict this 3D structure directly from the one-dimensional amino acid sequence? Effectively, approximately, you can think of it as the genetic sequence for the protein. And you want to directly predict this protein structure from the amino acid sequence. And if we could do that, it would be incredibly, save a lot of time, be useful for disease understanding and things like drug discovery. And probably many of you in the audience work on these structural biology problems, and you'll all know that it usually takes years of painstaking experimental work to do this with experimental methods like X-ray crystallography and so on. And so if we could crack this problem, it would massively speed this all up. And Christian and Feenson, in his Nobel lecture, actually nearly exactly 50 years ago, he conjectured that this should be possible, that the 3D structure of protein should be fully determined by the amino acid sequence. And that really set off a kind of 50-year grand challenge in biology to try and solve this problem. So why is this such a hard problem? And why has it been so difficult to solve? Well, Leventhal, contemporary of Feenson, he articulated this paradox, which is that he calculated that, he estimated that there are potentially 10 to the 300 possible conformations that an average protein can take. And yet somehow, and this is the paradox, obviously in nature, our proteins, somehow fold spontaneously within, a matter of milliseconds. So in some sense, physics has solved this seemingly intractable problem. So that, of course, gives us hope that computationally we could learn what this energy landscape is and actually solve the protein folding problem in a matter of seconds as well. Another reason we chose this problem is that there's this fantastic competition called CASP that's you can think of it as sort of the Olympics for protein folding. And it runs every 2 years, and it's been the kind of gold standard benchmark in the field since 1994. And it's an amazingly well-run competition. And it's a double-blind competition. So experimentalists, around the time of the competition, they hold back their publication for a month or two so that the structure they've just determined experimentally can be entered into the competition. But no one else in the world knows what the structure is. And then the computational teams have to predict that structure in a matter of a week, usually, and submit it. And then later on, the real structure is revealed as the ground truth, and then you compare it to the predicted structures. So this is the chart of progress of the previous 10 years of the competition back from 2006 to 2016, before we entered the competition in 2018 with AlphaFold 1. And you can see that this is the winning scores of the winning team. And on the left-hand side, the y-axis is the accuracy percentage. It's called GDT, which is what they score in the competition at CASP, how they score the predictions. And you can think of it as roughly the percentage number of residues, amino acids, that you've got in the right position within a certain tolerance. And you can see they're right down, the winning competitions are right down at 40%. Which is not very useful for any practical use case. It's just not accurate enough. And we were told by the competition organizers that they would consider this problem to be solved if you could reach atomic accuracy. So, i.e., the prediction had an average error of less than 1 angstrom, less than the width of a carbon atom. And that translates to about 90 on this GDT score. So you can see that the field was very far off doing that over the previous decade. So in CAS13, we entered AlphaFold 1, which for the first time introduced cutting-edge machine learning as the core part of the system, and that won the competition. But it didn't just win; it won by improving the accuracy by almost 50%. So a huge margin over the previous years. But then we went back, and of course, what we wanted to do was actually solve the problem, so to get to atomic accuracy. So we took all the knowledge we gained from AlphaFold 1, we re-architected the system, and then built AlphaFold 2, which eventually, in CAS14 in 2020, did reach this holy grail of the atomic accuracy, and it led the organizers to declare the problem solved. And more importantly, that meant it would be useful for practical biologists, and hopefully many of you in the room, to be able to rely on. So here's an example of, there were many innovations that had to go into AlphaFold, and one of the innovations was that it actually builds up the protein structure prediction in a cyclical fashion, in an iterative fashion. So it starts off with everything bunched up at the origin point, and then it kind of iteratively expands it into the final prediction. And you can see even with really complex proteins like this one, that how close and how accurate that it managed to get the prediction. So, you know, the green is the ground truth and the blue is the prediction here on the left-hand side. And another important point for biologists to use was that we also built into AlphaFold its own estimate of its confidence on the predictions on a per residue basis, so that biologists could see at a glance which parts of the predictor structure they can rely on and which parts they should perhaps validate experimentally before relying on it. So we published the methods, open source code, and all the predictions. And because AlphaFold was so accurate, but also very fast, so on average taking a few seconds per protein, we sort of realized that actually we could tractably fold all proteins known to science. So we spent a year using a lot of computers predicting over 200 million protein structures, so pretty much every protein known to science in the UniProt database. And in collaboration with our fantastic colleagues at EMBL EBI, just up the road in Cambridge, the European Bioinformatics Institute, we built the AlphaFold database and plugged it into all their main databases. So they host and maintain most of the world's biology databases. And we provided all these structures for free and unrestricted access for anyone to use for any purpose. And it's been incredibly gratifying to see what people have used it for. And just a mention on safety and ethics, which has always been core to everything we do at DeepMind. We consulted over 30 experts in biosecurity and pharma and biology research to make sure, before we put out this massive data set, that the benefits would far outweigh any risks, and they all unanimously agreed that that was the case. Since then, we've seen incredible wide range of use of AlphaFold. Here's just 6 examples that I like, but there's many more at our unfolded.deepmind site if you're interested in seeing what these incredible researchers are using AlphaFold for, all the way from things like designing plastic-eating enzymes to, I'm especially proud of our work with neglected diseases and the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Institute, which is allied with the WHO, to accelerate drug discovery in diseases that affect millions of people, but mostly in the poorer parts of the world that are often neglected by big pharma, and diseases like leishmaniasis, Zika virus, and so on. Their work has been massively accelerated by getting the protein structures for these viruses and bacteria. So there's been an incredible amount of work going on in this, and we couldn't have dreamed of all the different things that people would use AlphaFold for, and it's been amazing to see. And just in some numbers, there's been over 1 million, actually it's nearly 1.5 million now, users of the AlphaFold system or AlphaFold database, which pretty much we think is almost every biologist in the world. And there's over 15,000 citations now, and we've had some nice accolades for AlphaFold. And we've continued to sort of develop this further. So we've just recently published in Science Alpha Missense, which builds on AlphaFold to predict what the missense variants are if they are benign or harmful. And Alpha Missense is sort of classified around 89% now of the 71 million possible genetic variants, and only about 0.1% of those had been classified until now. So we're hoping that that will help with faster diagnosis and developing treatments for diseases like cystic fibrosis and some types of cancer. So we're looking forward to seeing what the scientific community is going to do with that. So I'll just talk one thing about the kind of an observation about what's happening here. I like using this phrase, science at digital speed. And what I'm trying to do with all this work and what we're trying to do is bring AI and other computational techniques to bear on scientific problems. And I think AlphaFold is a great example of science at digital speed in 2 ways. So one is that, of course, it solves the problem extremely quickly. So as I was saying, in a matter of minutes, sometimes even seconds, to give you a protein structure from its amino acid sequence. So that's one thing. But then secondly, we've been able to disseminate that solution and put it in the hands of scientists and researchers almost immediately. So through the databases, and it's just a simple keyword search away now for wherever you are in the world, for whatever research project you've got, whatever protein you're interested in, the 3D structure of the protein. So it's kind of amazing if you think about that. Even if you do big innovation, scientific innovation in the lab, it still can take many, many years for that to propagate through so that everyone is using that as a standard tool. And it's been amazing to see AlphaFold being adopted as a kind of standard workflow tool for biologists in a matter of a couple of years. So carrying this forward further, our work in biology is just beginning in some sense. I think we're maybe at the dawn of a new era of what I like to call digital biology. I think of biology, if you think about it at its most fundamental level, it's an information processing system that resists the second law of thermodynamics. It's an information processing system, but of course it's a phenomenally complex, emergent one. And because of that complexity and that interactive nature and dynamic nature of biology, I think it's the perfect type of regime for AI to be applied to. It's a bit like, mathematics was the right description language for physics. I think that AI potentially could be the right description language for biological phenomena. And I think AlphaFold is a proof of concept, and I hope that when we look back in 10 years' time, it won't just be this isolated success story, but actually the beginning of this new era of computational and digital biology. And we set up a new spin-out company, Isomorphic Labs, spun out from DeepMind and Google, that tries to take these technologies further into the area of more like biochemistry and small molecule design, to reimagine the whole drug discovery process, obviously building on AlphaFold as well, to redesign it from first principles from an AI-first perspective. And eventually, I hope one day we'll be able to build a virtual cell that you could do experiments in silico and it will be predictive of something and usefully predictive of things in the real world. So if we take all of this together and take a step back, what is the essence of what our systems are doing? They're basically finding an optimal solution in an enormous combinatorial space. So it's the proverbial, finding the needle in the haystack. And the way we do that is by learning a model of that environment, a very accurate predictive model of that environment, either from data and or simulation. And then we use that model to guide a search process, an efficient search process that tries to find a solution according to a particular objective function. And that actually turns out to be a very general solution to a lot of problems if you recouch it in this kind of framework. And we're working on many, many things, both across science, but also industrially as well. So as an example, going back to the Go tree, this was finding this tree search that found the best Go move in a particular position. But you could just replace the nodes in this tree with chemical compounds, i.e. drugs, and you're now traversing chemistry space if you could actually model and understand what chemistry and chemical compounds, the properties of them do. And so that's partly what we're doing at Isomorphic Labs. We've had a great few years, and I think this is going to turn out to be a kind of golden era for scientific discovery, applying AI as this new incredible tool to science and health. We've had many breakthroughs in many, many fields. So from 2018 with retinal scans and diagnosing eye disease, and incredible collaboration we've had over many years with more fields. And they've just had a new publication in Nature showing and actually putting this into production now in more fields of detecting all sorts of eye diseases directly from retinal scans extremely quickly. We've applied it to mathematical conjectures, solving big problems in topology. We've applied it to plasma containment in fusion reactors, finding better algorithms. So actually, this is a bit circular, improving matrix multiplication. As I said earlier, the foundation of everything in the universe, it seems. So we've got a faster matrix multiplication algorithm. We just published last week an open-sourced state-of-the-art weather forecasting system that's better than anything used in Met offices and takes a fraction of the time. And just today, we published a new paper on discovery of 380,000 new materials that could be used in batteries and superconductors and semiconductors. So I think this is just the beginning of perhaps a kind of almost a new renaissance of scientific discovery. We're also applying it to many everyday things. Almost everything at Google now has some AI technology in it, almost anything that you use or interact with, from the cooling in the data centers and being more energy efficient, to text-to-speech systems, to all sorts of recommendation systems. Anything that you get recommended on YouTube or Google Play or on other systems has AI under the hood powering those technologies. And I'll just end by talking a little bit about the sort of topic of the moment, which is large language models and large foundational models. Obviously, we have a long history of building many of these models at Google and at DeepMind. So Palm 2 and Chinchilla were our previous best models. We then specialized them into things like coding with AlphaCode, which can write programs at a competitive human programming level. And then Gato, which is our general large model that can do many, many different tasks, play games, deal with language, also even control things like robots. So we're pushing the frontiers on both language, but also this general space of capabilities. And of course, this goes way back to my colleagues at Google Research inventing transformers, which has really been that neural network architecture back in, I think, 2017, has really underpinned a lot of the modern AI industry. So we've been busy, hard at work this year on our next generation model called Gemini, and it's our largest and most capable and general model yet, and it's built from the ground up to be multimodal. So it doesn't just deal with text, but it also can deal with audio, video, images, and code. So, and intermix and interleave those in many, many flexible different ways. One observation, we're very excited about this, and we'll have more to say about this pretty soon, but one observation I would say about the whole field is that scaling these existing technologies as big as you can make them and as efficient as you can make them is super important, and we have lots of incredible engineers doing that, and a lot of compute is being used for that, but it's probably not sufficient on its own to get us to AGI. I think that quite a lot more innovations are going to be needed. And those of you, I'm sure almost everyone in the audience, I'm sure, has interacted with these chatbots. You know, they're pretty impressive what they can do, but they're also very flawed. And there's many things they still can't do. And we're working hard on those innovations that will plug some of those gaps in things like planning, reasoning, and my old PhD topic of episodic memory and imagination, I think is still missing from these current systems even today. So I'll just finish with a fun extra thing that we've just released in the last few weeks. We've been working hard on generative AI as well, which is another aspect of AI that's very exciting at the moment. And we released in experimental beta form our latest generative AI system called Lyria, which is the state-of-the-art at music creation. And we've been working closely with YouTube on this as a partner on this. And there are two types of things we're building. One is called Dream Track, which is in experimental beta at YouTube for YouTube creators to use to create music. Just from a text prompt, it creates the lyrics and all the music for whatever fun video it is that they're creating. And then also for artists, for musicians, professional musicians, we're creating a set of tools that allows them to tap into the power of AI to help them with their music creation process and make it and help inspire them and help it make it amplify their creativity. So one thing to discuss with that as well is obviously with this music generation and also image generation, we have our own image generation systems as well that are pretty incredible. We have to worry about things like deepfakes and how does one know if something's been generated, these extremely realistic generated audio now and images. So this is a problem we've been anticipating for a number of years now. And we've sort of created this system called SynthID, which invisibly watermarks either images or audio with sort of just by very subtly changing some of the pixels. So it's imperceptible to the human eye to make sure that it can be detected. So we actually use AI systems adversarially to create this synth ID system. So we actually have one system generating images. We have another system trying to detect whether that is a generated image. And we have an AI system in the middle that's perturbing the image in ways that will satisfy two objective functions. One is to be imperceptible to the human eye. So when we get human raters to rate it, they're at chance for rating which one has the watermark versus the one that doesn't have the watermark. But they're completely robust to all kinds of transformations like clipping, resizing, rotating, all the usual transformations one might do to try and get rid of sort of naive, superficial watermarks. And we put it out there in beta for the last 3 months. So far, it's survived all the attacks on it. So we're pretty sure it's pretty robust. We're going to leave it in testing for another sort of few months, and then once that's ready, we will make sure all of our generative AI systems use Synth ID, and we'll also potentially provide it to other third parties via our cloud services so they can embed their images with these watermarks as well. And then the idea is we have a detector, so anybody, a journalist or any citizen, can upload an image to the detector, and then it will tell you what it was generated by, when it was generated by, what version and what program. So I think this actually will address a lot. I mean, it's not a silver bullet, but it will be a good part of the technical solution to addressing the provenance question. So with that, I'll just end on talking about pioneering responsibly. I think AI has an incredible potential to help with humanity's greatest challenges. I think it will be one of the most transformative and beneficial technologies we'll ever invent. I've always believed that. That's why I've worked on it my whole life. But, and there is a but, we have to build AI responsibly and safely and make sure it's used for the benefit of everyone for us to realize this incredible potential. So in order to do that, my view is that we should not move fast and break things, which is the kind of Silicon Valley mantra. And of course, it's been extremely useful in creating all sorts of amazing companies and amazing services that we all use every day. But I think for this technology, it's just too important and too transformative to sort of move, to kind of use that approach. Instead, I would advocate more of a scientific method where we carefully consider each step. We do controlled experiments. We try and understand how these things work and the consequence of the sort of maybe potentially the unintended consequences of these things ahead of time where possible. It's not only possible to get that perfectly right. Something moving this fast and at that much on the frontier, there's always going to be some mistakes, but we should try and mitigate as many of those and the risks ahead of time as we can. So I sometimes say, we want more foresight with this technology rather than hindsight, which, maybe if you think about things like social media, that's become, these unintended consequences are sort of being realized in hindsight. And I think we can't afford to do that with AI. And it needs to be treated with sort of the respect and maybe even reverence that that the technology deserves and exceptional care. That's what we try to do at Google and DeepMind is we sort of advocate this idea of being bold and responsible. So bold with the potential with it, but also try and be responsible with mitigating the risks. And I think if we do that and we eventually build AGI, I feel like it could be the ultimate general purpose tool to help us understand the whole universe around us and maybe our place in it. Thanks for listening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel McKendry. I'm a professor here at UCL in the London Centre for Nanotechnology and Division of Medicine. And what an honour it is to sit here in the room after a speech like this. I mean, it was incredible, Demis. You've really challenged us to see how AI can help drive scientific discoveries from your days gaming, from Atari to AlphaFold, to AlphaGo, and then AlphaFold, and to see how you've shared these algorithms so broadly with the community, and now to see impact in material science and weather predictions. It's just incredible. And I think the applause, the audience here, we have, I understand, 1,200 people watching this lecture, 900 in person, and now we have a chance for you all to participate and ask questions of Demis. So hopefully you can see behind me, we're using Slido. So please get out your phones and type in slido.com #Prize Lecture. And there you can enter your questions on the topics that Demis has shared in his lecture, or vote on questions. And we'll be going through those and choosing the most highly ranked questions. But while things are warming up, maybe I can take Chairwoman's prerogative
Sure.
and begin the discussions. So you've talked about using the power of AI for public good, for the benefits of humanity, which is something that really resonates with me. My other job is as director of a large centre in early warning systems for infectious diseases, which is a huge challenge facing humanity, and the growing problem of antimicrobial resistance. So I was delighted to see that AlphaFold is now being used to look at searching for new antibiotics. But I wonder if you can expand a bit more on some of the challenges there as you see it, both from a drug discovery perspective, but perhaps from a stewardship perspective and a surveillance perspective as well.
No, I think it's an incredibly important job, and I think one of the examples I gave there was antimicrobial resistance. People are trying to use AlphaFold to, now they know the structure of some of the proteins involved in the bacteria, they can try and design, compounds that will attack that. I mean, the hard challenge next that we've got, and we're working on at Isomorphic Labs and at DeepMind, is biology is a dynamic system. So you can think of AlphaFold as perhaps, cracking or solving the static picture of a protein. But what we're really interested in is all the interactions, which is where everything comes to life. And so protein-protein interactions, protein-ligand binding, and understanding and moving into biochemistry as well. So how we can design compounds that attach to the right bit of the protein, bind very strongly, but then don't have any side effects. They're not toxic. Can we predict things like ADME properties, absorption, thermal properties, all these things that drug hunters care about. So we're working really hard on trying to predict those properties. The problem is, in a lot of those cases, there's a lot less data than there was with structural biology, where we were lucky enough to have the protein data bank and the PDB, and there was 150,000 structures there. Not that many, actually, for machine learning, but enough for us to learn from. So we'll need probably to collect more data before we can crack those problems.
And you're envisaging shortening a process that might take 10 years to develop a new drug.
Yeah, we would love to shorten it by an order of magnitude. I mean, I think one day I don't see why it wouldn't be possible to shorten that 10-year process, as you say, costing billions of dollars, down to, a matter of months instead of years, and costing a fraction of the development costs. And I think eventually this is the way that we'll have personalized medicines. Like, everyone talks about that, and can we actually design them for the specific disease someone has or their particular metabolism? I think the only way that's going to be possible is with AI tools, to maybe modify a generic drug to then be personalized to a specific instance. So that's the dream, really, over the next 10 years with something like Isomorphic Labs.
That's hugely exciting. I'm sure we'll all look forward to watching that space. Let's turn to the audience now for questions. Okay, I'm going to go with the most highly chosen question. So, as DeepMind is a business, can you shed light on the decision-making process behind determining when to release software, such as AlphaFold, as a free resource, which we are all in favour of, versus keeping it proprietary and potentially charging a fee for access?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you can imagine my CFO asked me that quite a lot. So, I think it's a case-by-case basis. We're hugely in favour of open science, and we've published, literally thousands of papers now for the benefit of the community. It depends on the situation and the particular work we're doing. Something like AlphaFold, it was always clear to us that would be, we're interested in impact, right? How can we make the most positive impact on the world? Of course, we have to make, in some cases, some return so that we can continue to do more of that kind of research. So we need that as funding. I mean, it's expensive with all the computers it uses and all the engineers and scientists. And so it has to be sustainable. But where we can, we want to, if it's clear with something like AlphaFold, we would only ever have been able to do a small fraction of what the entire community has done. There's many things I've never even heard of incredible things that people are doing with it. And we felt that was the quickest way to make the maximum impact in terms of AlphaFold. And I think the other criteria we had there was we did use the PDB and all these structures that painstakingly biologists have put together over 50 years, and that's an open database. So it felt only right for us to give back to that community, the structural biology community, with an open resource back that had utilized. Of course, we had to build all the clever algorithms and other stuff, but it did need that data. So in this specific case, I think that was important.
I think it's a huge gift to the community, and I think we all really appreciate your ethos to making those algorithms available. Okay, the votes are coming in, but
sure.
I'm going to take a question which I was particularly curious about as well, and thank you to everyone who voted for it. Perhaps a bit more personal now. If you could talk to yourself as a teenager, the boy from North London who liked to game, I have a son that's not too dissimilar, what advice would you give to him? Perhaps I can add on to that question. We're surrounded by 900 students and many more online. What advice would you give more broadly to everyone else?
Yeah, well, look, I tell you what I would do probably is, and maybe it's good advice for everyone here, is, I would have told myself to maybe just be more confident and believe even more in the ideas that I had. So it seemed of course I believed in them enough to try them, but I could have believed in them even more in the face of, many people being cynical about AI, we know that doesn't work and it's too far-fetched, it can't possibly be that transformative, all of those things. And I believed in enough to stay the path, but I think I could have been braver in moments. And perhaps, that's something for everyone to think about early in their career, especially us Brits. I think we're often, compared to my American colleagues, I think we're maybe a little bit cautious about being that ambitious because, what if it doesn't work, right? But it's, my Silicon Valley colleagues, they don't think like that, right? It's like, if it doesn't work, we'll move on to the next thing. And so, I just feel like we've got the talent here, all of you, and amazing universities like UCL, Cambridge, Oxford, incredible Imperial, incredible world-class universities. I just think we need to believe in ourselves more, that we really can change the world in these incredible ways. And it is possible. You've just got to try.
And you're doing it. So I think that's a lesson to all of us. Thank you so much. On behalf of all of us, we'd like to thank you for your tremendous thought leadership here. It's clear that from the very beginning of DeepMind, what set you aside is you were thinking about the ethical consequences. You had your own internal ethics committee and are championing responsible, bold and responsible research. I think there is a question about this, about what you spoke about at Bletchley Park. But it strikes me, what we're seeing, as you've called it, is science at digital speeds. I think the key challenge is, can we get governments and regulators working at digital speeds? Yeah. And it's an enormous gap, as I can see. And the capability is one component, but as you've said in one of your recent papers, it's looking also at the consequences, the human factors, the systemic consequences on society. And those things take time, and governments and regulators lack the resources potentially, the skills, the workforce to deliver regulation at speed.
Yeah, I think that's why it has to be a kind of collaboration with industry and government. I've actually been really impressed with the speed that the current government in the UK and also the US have got up to speed with things. There are a lot of actually very good advisors and with technical backgrounds in government at the moment. And, that's what allowed them to pull off things like the summit, I think, that went really well and was a good starting point. But I agree with you, it is a hard thing for regulation because the underlying technology is moving so fast and changing so fast. If we were sitting here a few years ago talking about what the latest is in AI, there'd be very different systems to the ones that we're worrying about or thinking about today. And I think that will change again in 2-3 years' time. So I think the important part is to, first of all, beef up regulations in existing areas like health, transport, and so on. That it's a bit like the internet or mobile. Like as new technology coming, we need to make sure that it addresses what those new technology, the challenges and the opportunities that new technology is going to bring. And then we have a little bit more time, I think, to worry about the more specific AI or AGI risks. So there, I think it's more about creating these almost research institutes in a way, like the AI Safety Institute, to do research analyses, things like interpretability, and build up tests for these systems ready for when in 3-4 years we might need to think about regulation.
Thank you so much. Perhaps I'm just going to move on to a slightly different question, which does link to some of the scientific challenges. And again, this is at the top of our questions. So what do you see as the most significant challenges or bottlenecks in the integration of AI into the scientific discovery process? And what strategies or innovations do you believe are needed to overcome them?
Well, what I would say, just a word of caution, I think that AI is going to be incredibly revolutionary for the sciences. I think across many domains, and I know that UCL and Geraint and others are looking at this very carefully. But it's not applicable to everything, right? So we don't want to jump to the other side as this magic bullet that's just going to solve everything. It really isn't. It's another tool. It's a fantastic one, and its capabilities are improving all the time. But there are many, I often talk to a lot of scientists and they say, oh, let's just use the AI for this, that, and the other. And I just look at the problem and it's actually, you should just use stats for that. It's not, you don't need any fancy learning AI system. And I just think there's a lot of that, like misnomers the other way. So it's sort of gone from like AI doesn't work, it's useless, to, oh, it'll do everything. And it's just obviously, as usual with these things, it's somewhere in the middle. And so it's about formulating the right question. It always is in science. That's the hardest thing. What is the right question to ask? And I would say it's the same with applying AI to whatever domain you're in, is like, what is actually the right question to use these types of systems and algorithms for? And that's why I sort of mentioned those 3 criteria I use. Right? Can it, there are other criteria you could use, and different AI systems will be useful for different ways. But at least for the types of ones I showed, it should satisfy those criteria. And if it doesn't, you probably should, you shouldn't be using, or you should use something else. It's not worth the effort to implement it with AI.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Finding the right question is key. We do have about 400 questions.
Okay.
So we could be here for a very long time, but it will probably continue afterwards. I'm going to end with a question. You said during your lecture, you mentioned that the protein folding problem had been one that you'd thought about for a long time, that you had a list.
Yes.
That you'd been accumulating over 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow. If you say that, we are so interested. Can you give us a glimpse of what might be to come?
Well, we've done quite a few of the lists. So Go was one, general games playing, protein folding. Some of the others are room temperature superconductor. Love to do that one day with material design. Solve a Millennium Prize problem in mathematics. So I have my eye on a couple. So those kinds of things are still on the list.
Oh, I wonder what you'd be like if you were bolder, actually.
Yeah, I guess there is that.
Well, just incredible. And I can say that I think here at UCL, we're so proud to have you as an alumni. I mean, it's just incredible. And the long-lasting, ties you've built to the university, founding positions, supporting scholarships, increasing diversity in AI. Demis Hassabis, I think you're an incredible force for good in society, and have shown this great scientific leadership and thought to recognise that with the power of the methods that are being developed, we do need to be respectful, cautious, and humble, and innovate responsibly. So please join me in thanking Demis. Really brilliant.
So, Demis, I have the job of thanking you on behalf of the university formally for your work, but obviously for a lecture that has been an extraordinary tour de force. And I bet across the room, people were thinking, as I was, what are the implications of all of this for the university? You know, how do we have to be changing? And of course, science has always been a dialogue between creative thinking and the tools that are available to us. So how do we create the capacity in people, not just to do things like form appropriate objective functions, but to exercise the kind of creativity that invents new AlphaGos? What does that look? That's an educational challenge on a whole new scale, but one that the university is going to have to think about. And I think the other thing that kept coming back was, in all that you were talking about, how important the process that we were talking about before the beginning of the lecture, that UCL is so distinctively good at, the process of putting back together the kinds of human understanding, the kind of creativity, the kind of learning that the last 200 years have been pulling apart. As so much of the functional work is going to be able to be done by machines, what does it mean for us to be asking those value questions, to ask them together? What does it mean to see the old divisions in learning disappear? Yeah. Well, you've modelled that. You're able to talk with equalies about biology, about computer science, but also about value and about society. And you're right. We are just incredibly proud, and we hope you'll remember us when you win the Millennium Prize. So on behalf of UCL, congratulations.